to engage with you yourselves, but you're more than happy to keep your cameras off. And like Zara said, if at any point you feel that you don't want to have your voice heard, you can just use the chat box, and I will respond to the chat box. So I'm going to talk to you today about why we still need to work towards gender equality specifically, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. And I'm hoping that this presentation will finish around about 10:50, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for questions and answers, and then we are more than happy to go into discussions in between. There are a few discussion points in today's presentation. We'd love to learn from yourselves and your expertise, your knowledge, so please do use the chat box, or please do use the voice element, and if you want to put your camera on, then please do so. What do I hope for you all to achieve out of this is understanding women's rights. Like Zara said, I'm very passionate about women's rights and having an inclusive workforce that's accessible. Understand the challenges women face within the workplace, but understand what gender inequality actually looks like. And there's different elements of gender inequality, but there's always solutions, and what are those practical solutions that we need to be looking at, and how do we actually have that in place, and what does allyship look like for ourselves? So I'm hoping that this is what you will leave today with. I want to touch on some facts for you first, and I want you to how far women have come within the workplace and how far women have come within rights. So if you go look at the first box in the corner, it talks about what World War I, where women would step in workplaces for their enlisted husbands and brothers within factories, shops and offices across the UK. And then it moves into 1980, where the first woman MP elected in the House of Commons was Constance McQuasey, who refused to take her seat as an act of protest, which goes back to a lot of history. But then if you move into looking at, it was illegal in the UK for women to work in legal or civil service in 1980. But by 1919, women had but by 1990 women were no longer disqualified because of their sex, and in 1975 it was then extended into education and training. So from stepping in for your enlisted husbands to taking a stance and a protest to say I'm not going to, and then to knowing that it was illegal to become legalized, we were coming a long way in terms of women's rights. But then it was a really interesting time in 1968 when 187 female workers walked out of Ford a car factory in Dagenham for earning 15% less than their male colleagues. And this was the first step to equal pay in the UK. So they walked out, and then from there we got the equal pay in 1970. From 1970 to 1983, women were then allowed to be paid the same as men. However, we would still disagree on that today. And do we find that it's equal within the pay gap? No, it's not. Do we feel that women are still valued within their roles? We've still got a long way to go. So how do we move forward from the facts and figures that we have, and where are we today, and what is it that we need to do? And I'm going to ask you one question. I just want you to give me one word answer for this. In one word, can you describe the current women's rights agenda? I just want you to use one word, and you can use the chat to put this, but I'm just going to put it out there for you, give you a couple of seconds to respond to this. And I just want you to say, in one word, describe the current women's rights agenda. So please use the chat box. Okay, we've got pay. There's no right or wrong answer in this. Unperfected, ongoing, unfinished, confusing, exhausting. Thank you so much, everyone. When you think about the current women's rights agenda, the energy that I am getting is that there's still a long way to go, and it's tiring to continuously talk about this subject. Am I right? Am I wrong on this? Because you're saying it's confusing, it's exhausting, it's ongoing, it's unfinished. And it is, because as women, you feel like, how long are we going to be talking about this? When are we actually going to see that change? Why is it that we continuously need to be justifying ourselves? Why do we continuously have to be working twice as hard? Why is it that we don't have that accessibility and that inclusiveness? And it can be, yeah, it can be. You're right, Mandy. Yes, and we step forward once and then take 2 steps back. And this is where today we are going to be looking at that allyship, and we're going to look at the strategic element, and how do we continue to move forward, and how do we empower ourselves to continue to be a voice for this area of work, because it is very, very tiring. And I always say to people, you don't know how hard it is being a woman trying to progress. Some of the comments I've been hearing recently is, it's now a woman's world. It seems like women are being pushed to the top. Oh, here we go again, women saying they don't have rights. What about the men? And these are quite interesting comments, because you think, are they actually ignorance, or actually are they direct or indirect discrimination? And we do need to look at gender inequalities. We do need to look at that. But we also need to understand the importance of what each individual brings to the table. However, we need to look at how women are still not getting an equal footing in the door from all aspects. I'm going to ask you another question, and I want, there's no right or wrong answer in this, but I want you to give me your honest opinion. What are the issues women face within the workplace? It could be anything. I just want you to give me sort of your points of what you think are the issues women face within the workplace. Top paid is most fields are men. Yeah, interesting. Progression. Yeah. If you had to look at what challenges do you feel, what your friends feel, what your colleagues feel, what would they be being given the same opportunities as men? And I'm going to, Katrina, I'm going to come to you on that, please. Could you shed a bit more light on that?
Yeah, so
If
can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so recently in my team, we had to attend a few events, and so these were networking events, business events, and the team manager decided that he would ask all the male team members first if they were available to attend these opportunities, so to say, rather than asking everyone at the same time. So that's one of the examples that I mean. But also, I know that some of my colleagues were given opportunities for personal development in terms of training. But when I asked my manager, they said, oh, there was nothing available.
Okay, Katrina, was your manager male or female?
She was female.
Right, and said that there was no opportunities available. On what grounds?
Just when I contacted the council's training department, they said there wasn't anything, but actually there is some training available through the apprenticeship program that the council actually contributes to. But my manager at the time wasn't aware of this.
Right, okay. Thank you, Katrina, for sharing that. It is interesting because when you look at working requests, how they're handled is really, really important. And do they actually discriminate on the basis of those requests? So thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting, why didn't your manager ask everyone at the same time? And why was it the males were asked first? I'm going to go into someone else. Mandy, could you share a bit more on abuse if seen as strong-minded, bad investment due to work breaks? If you feel comfortable talking about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think, pregnancy, being a mother, having the menopause, it's the old things about the work breaks and how emotional women are, in quotes. And then the actual the other part to the thing about the abuse is, and you can see it lots of times for women counsellors, the counsellors and other people, the abuse they get. I mean, we've had Nicola Sturgeon go. I mean, I'm not necessarily a supporter of hers, but the abuse they get because they're women, they get more than men in those high positions where they're in full view of everybody. And I think that's, I don't know why that is, and it seems to be more now. I don't know.
It's really interesting, Mandy, that you. No, it's really an interesting point, Mandy, because I remember when Theresa May was in post and continuously being why she doesn't have children, and then she had to publicly say she was not able to have children. But why was it that she was continuously being asked that question? And why was it that when she was in position of power, that's when she was continuously being that way? So it is really interesting in how women are received within certain positions, within political positions and non-political positions. But yes, if anybody else has got anything to share on that, we'd be happy to hear about that. And it's true, because the level of abuse that women do receive compared to males is shocking. Emily, can I come to you, because I do really like this, not being taken as seriously as men. If you're there, Emily, it'd be really good to get your points on that.
Hiya, sorry, yes,
Because
I'm here. I've got a bit of a sore throat, so I apologise.
No
yeah,
problem.
not taking it as seriously. In a previous role, it would I ran a business with my brother, who is male, and I was kind of in charge of making sure people paid their invoices, that sort of thing, amongst other things. But it was always a case of, well, one specific example was we had a male customer who hadn't paid their invoice, and my brother was speaking to them to kind of encourage them to pay their bill, and he kind of dismissed my brother and said, "Oh, it's fine, I'll speak to Emily about it," which was essentially meaning that he thought I was the soft touch. And my brother kind of got off the phone with him, rang me and laughed and said, well, he's got another thing coming, because I was kind of like, well, the work's been done, pay your invoice, sort of thing. And it was definitely a case of that customer didn't take me as seriously as he did my brother, so thought he was going to have a lighter touch option when coming to me, amongst all the other times that I was called the receptionist. Not that there's anything wrong with being a receptionist, but when you're running an entire business alongside a male partner, to be called the receptionist when you're doing a hell of a lot more than that was always quite demeaning as well. So there's a couple of examples for you.
No, Emily, I think you're totally right. And I think when a woman is assertive, then she's called out for being assertive. And then she, is profiled on that. And I think the amount of times I've been called a receptionist, Emily, is interesting. And we'll go into the traditional roles of what individuals feel, whether you be male or female, and what people perceive in terms of the profiling. But it is really interesting, because when you look at the emotional intelligence, did the individual have that emotional intelligence to understand that, when I'm looking at it, I'll feel, because it'll be the softer touch, but the male's not listening, but it's understanding that there's a job to be done. But then women do get discriminated against for being assertive and for being direct. Thank you, everyone, for that. I'm going to touch on a few things that I think would be really interesting for you to learn a little bit more about. Is direct and indirect discrimination, which we've obviously just talked about. And that's women being discriminated directly and indirectly, whether that come into applying for jobs, interview processes, saying that you can do the job, being asked if you want to apply, or so forth. And some of that discrimination can be also interpreted in banter, when it's not really banter, we need to be calling it out. The other thing issues that women face is the stereotypes and the psychological profiling. Women are continuously stereotyped to be in specific roles and to have specific demeanor and to have specific behavior. And that profiling does cause issues, because when a woman then calls it out, it's like, don't paint everybody with the same brush. And it's understanding. So I'll give you an example. When it's when someone needs to get a gift for the office person that's leaving, automatically it's assigned to a female. If it's like, oh, do you want to bring the food in? It's like, what are you bringing in? No one will ask the males, what are you bringing in? It will automatically be to the females, what are you going to be making? Those stereotypes are there, and we really need to look at that. And then I'll touch on that a little bit further about how we are unconsciously biased. Then there's the issues around limited progression. Where do we look at women who have children, women that have carers responsibility, women that are on mat leave? How do we, you know, give them opportunities? Where do we look at training for those women? Where do we look at what about women that, you know, want to work nights, or some might not want to work nights? So where does that limited progression come into place? And it's really important that we understand some of these issues that women face. The accessibility. Do we have a workforce that's accessible for women? You know, like we talked about menopause earlier on. Do we have services in place for women? It's not an issue, menopause, being on your period, being pregnant, it's not an issue. It's a right. And we need to be looking at, do we have workforces that are accessible? And that sexual harassment is still there in the workplace, and it's looking at how women are objectified within the workplace. And, you know, previously I've delivered workshops on misogyny and sexual violence within the workplace. And you know, it's a really, really interesting subject matter to look into. So I'm going to hone in a few ones and look at the gender pay gap. And if you look at the gender pay gap between men and women, it's really interesting, because in 2022, the difference between men's and women's average hourly rate is 5.45%, the median of 9.71. But if you look at the report Gender Pay Gap in the UK Office of National Statistics, it tells you that England is still, the pay gap is higher than Scotland and Northern Ireland. And I just think to ourselves, why is that? So if you look at the mean of hourly difference in ordinary pay is 1.44 compared to like 1.48 in 2021, and the median hourly difference is 2.41 compared to 2.26 in 2021. And it's understanding the stats of we are in, if you look at the chart, we are getting closer. If you look at the female view, but there's still a slight over pushing for the males in terms of what they're earning. But it's still really interesting that England still has the higher pay gap compared to Scotland and Northern Ireland. If you look at sexual harassment in England and Wales, the legal definition for sexual harassment is when someone carries out unwanted sexual behaviour towards another person that makes the person feel upset, scared, or offended. If you look at the Equality Act 2010, someone sexually harasses another person if they engage in unwanted conduct of sexual nature and the conduct has the purpose of the effect either violating the other person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, regarding offensive environment. The amount of times I hear women saying that I feel uncomfortable calling it out, the amount of times women will say, if I wear certain clothing, I'm going to be discriminated against. And then certain amount of times certain women feel objectified within the workplace for just dressing nice and understanding that they dress in how they want to dress. But the moment people see, it's like automatically profiled or stereotyped as, oh, you know, she's very sexual. No, she's not. She's just wearing what she wants to wear, and she's making that professional and comfortable. And did somebody see the article of where the newspaper went frenzy on the one of the superintendents that was looking at the Nicola Bullwig case, and how everyone said her dress was not professional for the press conference for a murder inquiry? Can I just get thumbs up if anybody saw that? Or any comments if anyone did see that? Right, well, that case, automatically, because she wore an A-line pencil dress that was up to her knees, she had cap sleeves, there was nothing wrong with what she was wearing. The media jumped on it. The media jumped on it so badly and said that she wasn't a professional woman and that her outfit was very sexual and it wasn't the appropriate outfit to be wearing for a press conference. When you look at the outfit, it's a conservative outfit. But because she was a slim, lean, physique woman, it was like automatically, oh, it's inappropriate. And it's a really interesting debate because many people called it out. So women are still being objectified within that sense. But did you know that 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime? You know, looking at the stats. But it's really interesting because when I was looking at this part of it, as another generation of women will have to work harder and wait for gender parity according to the World Economic Forum Gender Pay Gap Report 2021. Because this report here at the impact of COVID pandemic continues to be felt closing the pay gap, which has increased by a generation from 99.5 years to 135.6 years because of COVID-19. And if you want to read more about this, then, you know, please do. And it's around the World Economics Forum Global Gender Pay Gap Report in 2021. The pandemic has had a big impact on a lot of things, and there is still areas of growth. Just seeing, have I missed anything in the chat? Yes, this is Nicola. That is exactly, there's nothing wrong with what she was wearing. That is the same image. Thank you, Nicola, for sharing that. Mandy's put down there was a case of a politician in the House of Parliament. Yes, and that was Tracy Barban when she had addressed, I think it was slightly over the shoulder, and it went into a whole debate that it was not appropriate, etc. I don't think there's anything wrong with this, and I think people need to understand that it's a professional outlook in this, and why is it that the media had to jump on that? Do they jump on the same when it comes to males? So there's some really interesting points to look at. When you look at systemic and structural inequalities that leave women disadvantaged in the workplace, you're looking at a number of things here. And I'm just going to give you a few points here. And what you are looking at is the not given the same opportunity to progress as your counterpart colleagues, not even being asked about that. Embedded biases within the organisation that are already there. For instance, an interview process may advantage a candidate who are of the opposite sex, not being made aware of an opening of a post. Managers give women fewer challenging roles and less compared to men. And that was in around what is the structural inequality report. So realistically, if you look at from recruitment process to given an opportunity to be even being made aware of an opportunity, there are going to be challenges in the system, and how do we change that system, and how do we look at those traditional roles, and how do we actually make our recruitment processes inclusive for women. When we look at maternity policies, it's really interesting because if you watch EastEnders at the moment, there's a really interesting scene being done on this. But the UK first introduced its first maternity leave legislation through the Employment Protection Act in 1975, which further, obviously, legislation such as the Employment Act 1980. However, for the first 15 years, only half of the women were eligible because of the qualifying period. So if you watch EastEnders at the moment, they're doing a scene on this where one of the characters is pregnant, and unfortunately she was not able to carry her baby to the full term. And when she went for her scans, the doctors had turned around and said to her that she's not able to carry a baby. She can carry a baby to 9 months, but her baby still will pass, or she can be induced early and have her baby, because unfortunately, no matter what stage she is, her baby will pass away. So when she went and asked for as self-employed, and she asked for maternity leave, and she asked for her market stall to be saved, they turned around and said, well, you don't qualify within the period of 26 weeks. Now it may, and she said, but what about the people that miscarry? What about the individuals that have struggled to fall pregnant and they've been born with a stillborn? How does it work, and how are we making these adaptations within that? So you can say that for the first 15 years, half of the working women were eligible for it because of the long qualifying periods. However, when you look at 1993, the coverage was extended to tell working women in order to Britain to be in compliance with the European Commission. So we felt like a lot of the things changed because they changed in the European Commission. And it was only then, and it makes you think of the traditional roles of women, because it was in 2003 that male employees received statutory pay for the first time. And I think we're in 2023, So that was 20 years ago, and then it was extended in January 2010. So 13 years ago, it obviously was extended. Did we still see that the traditional role of a woman was to be at home, to take care of her children, and to be the breadwinner, to be the housewife, and the male would be the breadwinner? Because there are many fathers who probably want to be with their wife and support her longer than 2 weeks. Where do we see that in place? But then what do we put in place for those that have actually gone through bereavement and had, lost their baby, had miscarriages, and had stillborns? Where are the maternity policies in place for those? And that is discretionary to the organisation. But when you look at IVF, and as some women struggle to have children, or some women are going through a transition period, if you become pregnant through IVF, you still have the same rights as pregnancy, rights as non-IVF pregnancy. There's no legal right on this, and it's really important that people know that you still have the same legal rights. It doesn't matter because you're still pregnant. When you look at this, you could, in terms of the sickness, women are disqualified a number of times within the workplace because of morning sickness, because of routine checkups, or because women are like, okay, well, do you want to take time off? Do you have an appointment? Can you bring me a letter? And it's all discretionary of how your manager deals with your requests, and how individuals actually look at this. Yesterday, when I was delivering training on pregnancy and maternity rights for women within the workplace, what I found is some women had said that, do you know what, my manager was actually really supportive. My manager was really good when I told her that I was pregnant. She put everything in place. And then another lady had talked about she felt discriminated when she came back to work after having her child, because people said, you're going back full time. Why are you going back full time? Don't you think you should be going back? And it was about her understanding that at the end of the day, she's had her baby and she wants to go back to work. So, there's a challenge for a woman to, try to get pregnant. And when she gets pregnant, whichever means it's made her become pregnant, and then she has the challenges of while she's pregnant, then she has the challenges of while she's on mat leave and then returning to work. So it's really understanding about that, and where does that lie in. When we look at traditional roles of women, it's really interesting because we look at middle and lower level roles. And the percentage of higher roles is limited. So you look at teachers, nurses, receptionists, cleaners and carers when you look at traditional roles of women. However, when you speak to teachers, some teachers will say that they've chose those roles because they help with their childcare facilities, they help with their children's timescale. So they will look at what is accessible for their life. And when you look at nurses and receptionists, and the amount of times I get called a receptionist, cleaners and carers, people work on adaptations of certain roles and certain time frames. But that doesn't mean some women might not want to work nights. That does not mean some women don't want to work longer hours. And I think we need to stop profiling on that, and we need to look at, where does that accessibility come from? I'm just going to quickly touch on unconscious bias. We have that. Our brain automatically tells us that we're not safe, that we are safe with people that look like us and that are similar to us. And some of those behaviours can come in different types. So you got feeling a connection is affinity bias. We have our perception biases. We have our halo effect, and we have our confirmation bias. When you look at the confirmation bias, you're looking to confirm our own opinions on pre-existing ideas. And it's really, really important that we reflect that we naturally feel comfortable with those that are around us, that have similar views. What do I want you guys to do now? What do I want everyone to look at is address those unconscious biases within the workplace. Because if we address all of these issues, we look at diverse talent. We look at women from all walks of life. We look at clear representation. We look at accountability to fair decision making. We look at positive engagement. We look at encouraging creativity. We look at better results, and we look at productivity. Now, if you feel respected and valued within your workplace, then you're going to feel that. How can we do that? We need to address our own behavior, because behavior is, if you look at the learning and development theory by Albert Bandura, you observe your behavior through modeling. So we need to be calling it out and looking at where do women's rights sit within the workplace. And it's not an issue. You're not an issue. You're just saying, can I just explain to you where women sit within the workplace and what are we doing to make that happen? Because most of the times when you look at it, if we all stay silent in the room and in our minds we're thinking, I will speak up when the next person says something because I don't want to sound silly, but the next person's thinking the same and the next person's thinking the same. We're sat in a room of silence. So it takes great courage to speak out. It takes great confidence to speak out, but it gives people will have admiration for you for saying, do you know what, I'm going to call this out. When you move into different types of allyship, so when I'm asking you to be allies amongst each other, allies for people that you don't know, allies for those that you work with within your workforce, I'm looking at 3 types of allyship. I'm looking at individual, interpersonal, and structural, because you need to have an individual purpose. You need to make sure that you don't tarnish everybody with the same brush. You don't paint everybody with the same brush, but it needs to be an interpersonal connection. Help me understand you. How can we work together? What are my actions that I can do to support you? But what are the structural systems that we are putting in place, i.e. like Zara talked about in the chat box, the policies? What policies are we putting in place for individuals to have that allyship and to know that, do you know what, we stand with you? So women's rights still have a long way, but then what you've also got to look at is that we have our unconscious biases. We know that we feel comfortable with certain people. We want to speak out, but we're scared to speak out. So where does the allyship with men lie on women's rights? Because it shouldn't just be women talking about women's rights, it should be men. I'm going to give you a case study that we worked on. A consultation was carried out in 2022. I'm not going to name the organisation. And basically, the man wanted to start working part-time to look after his children. And him and his wife spoke about it, and they felt that he would be better going part-time because she earned a better wage. When he spoke to his colleagues, the first thing he heard from his colleagues was, why are you going part-time? Isn't it her job to look after the kids? And are you under the thumb? These comments were made openly with no consideration for women. What do you think? This was in 2022. So I just really want to know your thoughts on this. So they had a conversation between each other. She earned the better wage. He was happy to go part-time. And she was really happy about that. As soon as he told his colleagues, the comments that he got is, why are you going part-time? Isn't it her job to look after the kids? And are you under the thumb? And automatically it was scapegoating the woman without even looking at the whole situation. Oh, you know, she's got you under the thumb. She's the one that's telling you. But that was his choice. He wanted to go part-time. So men feeling that they can call it out then goes into demasculization and not feeling that they can be those men. Yeah, it might have been, you're right, Katrina. It seems to me that the other men felt threatened. Yeah, interesting point. And, you know, the man that I was talking to was such a pleasant man. And, you know, he said, look, Sophia, you know, I want to do this. I want to understand. I want to be there for my wife. And, you know, I'd be more than happy to take it easy. Mandy, being a carer and at home is seen as easy and nothing. Yes, it's so true. And looking at caring responsibilities, and people don't realise even to be a full-time mother, to look after your children, to look after an elderly person, to look after additional needs individuals, it is very, very tiring and draining. But where do we look at the women's mental health in this within the workplace? And you'd be surprised how many women are actually carers for their families, and how many women, you know, as they progress their roles and stuff, might feel that they have so much other responsibility, and that's why they can't progress onto certain roles because of the caring responsibilities at home. There aren't many many role models for men, Katrina's put, who are at stay-home dads who take part of the childcare and housework. Yes, and you know what, Katrina, we need to be raising more awareness of this. This is not about an alpha female. This is not about an alpha male. This is about a joint responsibility and a care and a consideration. We need to stop profiling women and stereotyping them to be specific roles. And there's nothing wrong with someone having emotional intelligence to say, do you know what, I want to support you. I understand, you know, today might have been a difficult day, and how can I help you? And I think we should not demasculate men. But when we looked at the statistics on this, the importance of allyship of men, masculinity, men's masculinity is questioned when calling out sexism and standing for women's right. And if you look at the study, masculine anxiety interpretation, sexism at work, 1 in 4 men said they would likely to do nothing if a colleague makes a sexist comment, because they're afraid of being left out and their masculinity being questioned. So it's not about, we're not here to think about how you feel, we're here to think about how everyone feels. And it's really important that we understand that we need to understand how men feel, how women feel, how individuals who have identified themselves as non-binary feel. How does a person feel? That's what we need to be looking at. And how do we take those stereotypes away? However, we also need to understand the importance of women within the workplace that have additional responsibilities, and provide her with the accessibility to be able to progress on that stand when women looking for those allies as men. I'm not going to do this for 10 minutes. I'm going to probably give you 5 minutes. And I want to ask you, because I've done a lot of talking, and thank you for your patience. I want to ask you, how do we talk about and challenge discrimination? And what role do we all play in this? I can do these presentations all day long, but then it's really important that I sit and look at policies, procedures, systemic stuff, you know, equality person. And I'll give you an example. I was doing an interview for a certain position, and I think the job was like over 100,000, and I was the only female in the room among so many males. And I remember interviewing a number of, there was only one female that had been shortlisted for the post, and the rest were males. And I think there were 6 people, and out of the 6 people, 4 of the men didn't acknowledge me in the interview. And yet I was interviewing them. They acknowledged all the men, but even though I actually changed position of where I was sat to face them, and I was asking the equality questions, it was just interesting that when they responded to the answer, they looked at my male colleagues, not myself, even though I was asking the question. And there was one female that was in the room, and when she got really passionate about some success that she had achieved, she started crying because she was very, very proud of what she'd achieved. And I was the first one to go and get her a tissue and say, and she's there apologizing. I said, no, don't apologize at all. You're passionate. Your passion can shine through. You don't have to apologize. But some individuals may see that as weak. No, that's not weakness. She was just passionate about that. And it is shocking, Nicola, and I called it out. But what was really interesting, that there was 2 males who actually really acknowledged me and looked directly at me. And I even said it to the males that were interviewing with me. I said, did you see that none of those males actually acknowledged me? And they said, we thought that. And we even saw that you changed your body positioning in the interviews, but still they responded directly to us. And I said, what's shocking is these individuals will be in charge of hundreds of people, and the ideology that they may have of a value of a woman is really concerning for me. But luckily, the person that was appointed was somebody that I wanted, and had real good understanding of women and women's roles out in society. But how do we talk about challenge? How do we talk about this, and how do we challenge the discrimination? What role do we play? How can we do this in our offices, in our teams, within our, you know, social gatherings, you know, when we're sat with our friends? How do we continuously educate and challenge discrimination? And how do we call it out, and what role do we play? Any comments on this? I think a lot of it comes down to having the confidence to call it out, and the confidence to say, these are my rights, and this is what I stand by. And it's really, really important that we look at that, because we need to be looking at confidence. We need to be having faith within a system that is going to make it accessible for us. And we need to be having a voice at every single level. So I'm talking about a voice, everything from grassroots all the way to SLT. There needs to be a woman's voice within that. When we talk about menopause, when we talk about periods, when we talk about pregnancies, when we talk about maternity rights, anything, we have to look at the emotional intelligence of this. We need to look at how women feel. We need to look at how women actually respond. And we need to be looking at that, you know, we as women are each other's allies, but we have men as well as allies. Even though Zara has just said, I noticed there are no men on the session today. And it was interesting when we looked at the pregnancy and maternity videos, we did have some men on there, but very, very limited. So it makes me understand, does this appeal to them? Do you want to learn about women's rights? Do you want to learn about how far women have come? And do we need to be continuously educating? I'll be honest, the amount of times I call things out and I get called alpha female or a feminist, and I'm just like, well, hold up, let me just stop and educate you. Because I will educate you and I will raise this awareness with you, and hopefully you'll take some learning away from it, because with your ignorant views, you're not going to understand. So we've got Mandy's put, perhaps we see something to gain. I'm going to come into this chat. Please, everyone, put your comments in. Mandy's put, perhaps we see something as something to gain, and men may see it as something to lose. Yeah, maybe so. But I'll be honest with you, the amount of allyship that I have from males on this subject matter is really, really supportive. I just think we don't see enough of those men out within society that do actually support this. And I think it's about looking at, because there's a massive review being done on masculinity at the moment. You've got the whole Andrew Tate thing that has told men, you need to be men, you need to stand up. No, we need to look at social emotional intelligence and what that sits like. I'm going to leave you with 2 points. Okay. What needs to be done is this: we need to have a workforce. So you're that workforce that knows the team's representation. We need to look at respect and value for women. We need to understand how we can engage with women. We need to be very transparent and take responsibility of where we're not getting it right. And what we need to look at is diverseness within the workforce and accessibility. And what we need to do is motivate and empower women. It's very clear. Know your team, respect and value those women within your team, understand them and engage with them. Be transparent and take responsibility. So when Katrina talked about, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Katrina, when Katrina talked about the opportunities of not being given opportunities, but her male colleagues were given opportunity, take responsibility. We need to take responsibility on this. And we need to make sure that they're accessible for women who, you know, the amount of times, you know, people have said to me, I've come off maternity leave and I feel like I've just lost everything. I don't know what's going on. What are we doing to have accessibility there? And how do we motivate and empower our women to be, you know, that you can be the best of the best within the organization? How do we do that? And that is very clear. And it's the solution is Batari box, which is my behavior has an impact on your attitude on your behavior to my attitude. So what we deliver is what we receive. And we need to take responsibility for that. So we need to demonstrate behavior of solidarity, empathy, understanding, and rightfulness. And what we need to then deliver it in a respectful way where everyone feels inclusive. So we're not just waving the flag for women, but we're saying there needs to be an equal footing in the door. I'll leave it as that, and I'm going to put it down and ask you any questions or anything that anyone's got to say, and take it from there. I want to say thank you so much for being so patient, because that is a lot to take in such a short space of time. You know, so please give me your comments in the chat box. You know, have you got any questions? Do you feel we need to do ups on this? Would you like an in-person session on this, a longer one? Do you want to look at some strategies that we put in place? What is it that you want to be looking at? That'd be really good. And if you can put that in the chat box, that'd be brilliant. And just give us your feedback. I'm sure Zara will send out a feedback form, but I'd just love to hear your comments of how did you find today's session? It'd be really good to know. We've got some conversation. Yeah, it's really interesting, Katrina, where you say men are welcome and join these sessions, because when we did the misogyny sessions, it was really interesting that the men found that it wasn't a male bashing session, and they found it very, informative and inclusive. So I think we do need more people, more men in this. So if you could give me your feedback, and is there any questions? More than happy to answer them. Thank you, Katrina. I hope there is food for thought, and I hope that you all have the confidence to know that you have a right to belong and that you have a right to call it out, and you shouldn't be scared of that. And I know sometimes people are scared of calling something out because of what the repercussions may be. And we need to be looking at that, because we shouldn't be looking at feeling scared to call something out and worrying about what may be the repercussions, because there should not be repercussions in terms of anything. There should be development and awareness in this. But thank you so much for your time. And like I said, if you could please give me some feedback within the chat. And Zara's asked a question as well. Zara's put down, is anyone part of the Women Staff Network? One of the things that she's looking to do is create a cross-sector network for our place, so we can expand the sharing. So if you're interested in that, please, do contact Zara. Recently, my team got an upgrade. One man said that we were worth it. We are worth it. The women were just grateful. Just some of it is confident. It's 100% recognition. Recognition and value is so important for women. I was talking to one of the other case study women that I was working with, and she was pregnant. And she was on mat leave. And while she was on mat leave, she fell pregnant again. And she was returning to work within a month or so. And then she'd be going back on mat leave because she was quite far on in her pregnancy. Her male manager was so supportive. He's like, this is such exciting times. I can't believe, you've got another one coming so close to age. They put so many measures in place, and this was a large charity. But what we found is that women's rights differ within corporate field, and within the VCS field, and that's what some of the women have said. Their rights within the corporate are totally different to their rights of working within the statutory or the voluntary sector. Yeah, I wonder how the Nicholas put, I wonder how this links to, oh, right, let me go back to this. Nicholas put, I wonder how this links to the wider inclusion agenda. I think it's so helpful to understand other people's experience, whether related to being a woman or LGBTQ. I think the real life examples really make the think and reflect. Yeah, 100%, I agree with you. And when I was talking to the case studies around maternity rights and pregnancy rights, and one of the women, it took her 8 years to become pregnant. And she was so excited. She was finally having her first child, I think around 40. And the way her workforce treated her when she wanted to come back on flexible working, because she'd realised that her child actually had additional needs, there was nothing in place. And they were just like, well, you need to come back. And she's like, well, can we not work remotely? Because obviously we've had COVID, we've learned that we can work remotely. They were adamant that they would decide the days that she would have to be in the office, and that the days that she could work from home. And she was like, look, I need to work around his appointments. He's got a lot of appointments and so forth. And what was really interesting is that when you look at the two organisations, the corporate one was very dismissive of the woman, even though it had taken her a while to become pregnant. Whereas when you look at the charity sector, they were very forthcoming and very welcoming, and the approaches were different, because the corporate one was actually a woman to a woman. The VCS was a man to a woman. So as women managers, do we become a bit more different in our approaches to women? And what does that allyship look like? So it's really, really important. Thank you. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time on this, but I know Zara's cut this off in it'll go within 2 minutes. But Zara, I'm going to bring you on now, please, for final marks.
No, just a really warm sort of thank you for attending this morning, and please just go and talk about this with colleagues more than anything else. We would love to have you more involved in future sessions. And I think a lot of the things that you've already said within the chat about the opportunity to hear from lived experience is a really important part of what we're trying to do, because actually there's some really great work and some really good practice that is being delivered across our place. And I think this is about, especially around the Amplify work, is about trying to highlight that and get some more visibility. This isn't going to be the end of the conversation. We want to, use this opportunity, like I said in the chat, to create much more of that cross collaboration, cross sector working, where actually we're not just talking about it from internally from an organisation, but we get to share those experiences across with other voluntary sector organisations, other statutory organisations as well, and actually get us all working in the same direction. And I think there's something about when there's many of us, the work becomes a lot lighter, and it does need all of us, because it does benefit everyone within society, obviously, when we do improve gender equality. So just a big thank you. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, of course, my email, I'll put it in the chat. And I'm sure that if you want to, you can also contact Sophia. She is available on things like Twitter and LinkedIn. So do connect where you want to. Thank you, everyone.